Though nothing had burned, the taste of ash lingered on my tongue. My career, perhaps, had been the only casualty. With every step I took away from the gleaming glass palace, it felt like an escape. A desperate attempt to distance myself from the searing gazes that continued to burn upon my skin. And beneath the stinging pain of humiliation, something else stirred. There was a quiet, unsettling hum, a sound I couldn't name, and it terrified me more than anything I'd ever encountered. The November blackness outside the window reflected my inner teaching, and yet I didn't really look at it. My eyes remained glued to the blank wall of my living room, a place where, just hours ago, the softly glowing light of my bedside lamp had peacefully resided until I lost myself in a burst of utterly pointless fury and smashed it into pieces. Splinters like those in Klaus' office. Before. How long ago? A week? An eternity. The crashing of the glass, each shard striking the marble floor of his office, felt like a little explosion inside me. It was a sharp, unsettling sound that resonated deep. I jerked, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, the very keys, where I'd been furiously typing the urgent correspondence that needed finishing by noon. By this point, it had been 11:47 a.m., and apparently 13 minutes had simply proved insufficient for his impossibly exacting standards. This is what they call acceptable work? His voice was deep, dangerously so, the kind of silence that always precedes a storm. Over a period of 18 months, I had worked as his executive secretary, developing an ability to interpret the subtle nuances in his tone of voice much as a sailor reads the sky. That particular tone meant someone was about to be destroyed. And that day I'd gotten up slowly, carefully smoothing the dark gray pencil skirt with hands that, despite my best efforts to seem calm, still trembled noticeably. His office was a monument to power and wealth, with dark oak wood paneling all around and floor-to-ceiling windows from which he controlled the city. Klaus was hidden in the shadows. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully placed object screamed money and danger in equal measure. I stated, "I followed your instructions perfectly, Mr. Caruso," attempting to keep my voice calm even though my heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "The letter to the judge's family contained all the points you skimmed this morning." Previously, he had risen from behind his enormous desk, his movements fluid and possessed of the elegant grace of a predatory animal. His impressively tall figure seemed to absorb the space between us completely. Klaus Caruso was brutally attractive in a way that made smart women stupid. A sharp jawline marked by a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. Dark hair, always perfectly styled. Storm gray eyes that could dismantle any carefully constructed defense. It's highly likely that his custom-made 3-piece suit crafted from a fabric in a distinctive graffiti shade cost more than I pay in rent every month. Her broad, emphasized shoulders and a physique that strongly suggested he possessed equal familiarity with violence and the intricate workings of boardroom negotiations. He'd reiterated, "You followed my instructions," each word dripping with such disdain that I almost recoiled. He was close enough for me to scent his cologne, a costly woody fragrance that always provoked a far more intense, unwanted physical response in me than I could ever account for. "Hannah," he'd asked, the tone cutting like a blade, "what use are instructions when intelligence or initiative are conspicuously absent?" The words, while justified, struck deeper than expected, leaving a persistent. I'd graduated at the top of my class, balancing academic success with the considerable burden of supporting my younger sister Lena throughout college, and secured this position solely on the strength of my superior abilities. But Klaus Caruso, it seemed, had a peculiar knack for perpetually undermining my self-confidence, making me feel as though my continued employment was precariously balanced on the edge of oblivion. I swiftly countered, I could certainly revise it, but disliked the hesitant way my voice escaped. My physiological response usually controlled, spiraled completely in my grasp. Aware of how his presence seemed to fill every oxygen molecule in the room. The Richters expect this correspondence by 1 p.m. This provides them with more than an hour, allowing ample time for a complete rewrite. They need to approach it fresh, ensuring the final product avoids the appearance of hiring incompetent children. His eyes swept over me with something that wasn't quite contempt, but felt as equally cutting, and I had worn my most professional. The dark gray zechgut in a cream silk blouse that made me feel competent and in control. But under his scrutiny, I felt exposed, as if he could see through the carefully maintained facade. The woman, analyzing every barbed comment for hidden meaning. "I'll finish it," I had said, lifting my chin with the last semblance of dignity I could salvage. "See that you do." With a dismissive gesture, he had turned his back on me. "And Hannah, the next time you feel inclined to interpret my instructions rather than to execute them precisely, remember that there are 100 women who would be quite willing to kill for the position you currently hold. You are unfortunately quite replaceable. Therefore, you should conduct yourself accordingly." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, but I forced myself to walk calmly back to my desk just outside his office door. It wasn't until I was seated, safely hidden behind my computer screen, that I allowed my carefully constructed mask of professionalism to falter slightly. My hands trembled as I opened the document, and my visions threatened to blur with unshed tears. Replaceable. The word resonated in my mind, mocking my considerable efforts. After 15 months of relentless work, 70 hours each week of anticipating his needs before they were even voiced, of mastering the intricate workings of his legitimate business empire, and of carefully ignoring the persistent rumors surrounding his other, less ethical ventures, to be told that I was merely replaceable felt like a profound and devastating injustice. What really bothers me right now is the idea that we could all be so easily replaced or interchangeable. You give it your all, sacrifice your free time, your relationships, your dreams, and in the end, you're just a cog in a wheel that can be easily replaced when needed. Does this mean that achieving success in this world inevitably comes at the cost of losing one's humanity, reducing all to mere performance? Sometimes at night when the city is silent and the only sound is the echo of my own doubts, this thought keeps me awake. It's a persistent. The worst part was knowing that he was right. Klaus Caruso could snap his fingers and have a line of qualified candidates at his door within hours. Such was the desirability of the position of executive secretary to one of the city's most influential figures. Even the notorious difficult Klaus, that people ignored the brutal working hours and the even more brutal boss in favor of the song everyone hates. I closed my eyes briefly, fought back the tears, and started writing the letter over again. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, using every ounce of skill I possessed. I hated him at that moment. Hated his impossible standards, the nonchalant nature of his cruelty, the way he made me feel at the same time, both completely worthless and acutely aware of his presence. So, underneath the hatred, though, lay something darker, something far more complicated. It was a feeling that accelerated my pulse when he stood too near, a feeling that made me acutely aware of the way his suit draped perfectly across his shoulders, a feeling that compelled me to replay our interactions long after I should have forgotten them. It was irrational, self-destructive, and utterly undeniable. I was drawn to a man who treated me like a disposable commodity. Upon gaining that insight, my typing speed significantly increased, allowing me to channel my frustration into productive work. 20 minutes before the deadline, I finished writing the letter. I then proceeded to proofread it 3 times carefully before printing it on the high-quality stationery that he preferred for important correspondence. Although my heart pounded with anticipation, my hand remained steady as I placed it on his desk. The moment he looked up from his papers, my breath caught in my throat. He read silently, his expression betraying nothing. I stood before his desk like a student who was awaiting judgment, my professional mask firmly in place despite the unrest below. Finally, he set the letter down. "Better," he said. The single word was somehow more devastating than his earlier critique. Not good, not excellent, just better. "You can go to lunch." I retreated to my desk and grabbed my purse, hands still slightly trembling, and looked. The executive suite of the building was quiet. Most people were already on their lunch break. I rode the elevator to the lobby and nodded politely to the security guards, who knew me by name. After 18 months of arriving at dawn and leaving long after dark, the November air hit my face like a slap, cold and cleansing. I walked aimlessly, the distance between me and this office, this man, this impossible situation. My feet carried me to a small park 3 blocks away, a green lung in the jungle of steel and glass, where I sometimes went to blow off steam. I took a seat on a bench and at last permitted myself the release of shedding my tears freely. Silently they arrived, streaming down my cheeks as I fixed my gaze upon the bare trees and the somber gray sky. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, From the constant stress of walking on eggshells, the unending self-doubt with every decision, and the pervasive feeling of failure despite my best effort. Difficult morning? I looked up sharply, hastily wiping away my tears. Standing a few steps away, Hans Mier showed concern in the dark depths of his eyes. He was Klaus' business partner, though their relationship seemed more complicated than a simple partnership. Where Klaus was all sharp edges and barely controlled violence, Hans was all gentle charm and calculated warmth. He held a different kind of charm, boasting, perfectly styled, dark hair, a face that could grace any perfume, commercial, and suits whose exclusivity rivaled Klaus's, yet somehow appeared far less threatening to those around him. With Klaus, one either ran or submitted. With Hans, however, there was a strong inclination toward a trust or towards complete reliance on his evident strength, a strength that commanded respect and inspired confidence. "I'm fine," I lied, a forced smile playing on my lips. It likely looked as phony as the way it felt inside. "With all due respect, Hannah, you look like you've been crying." He moved closer, not presumptuous enough to sit down without an invitation, but close enough to offer comfort. Was there some sort of incident? I regret putting my trust in him. Hans was Klaus' business partner, making him a potential ally or adversary, depending on their shifting relationship dynamic. But the weight of carrying it all on my own was becoming overwhelming. I was tired of pretending that Klaus's consistent criticism didn't bother me. Just a difficult client meeting, I claimed, a lie so obvious even to me. Hans's reaction suggested he had a perfect idea of who the problematic client was. "Klaus can be quite demanding," he remarked, his voice carefully controlled, his tone diplomatic. "He seeks perfection in everyone, but particularly from those closest to him, those closest." I couldn't suppress the bitter laugh that burst from me. "My role is that of his secretary. I am not his confidant. You are something much greater." Hans then took a seat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance, yet close enough for me to detect the faint scent of his cologne, lighter and more citrusy than Klaus's darker, woodier perfume. "You are the only individual who has held this position for more than 6 months, the only one who possesses the ability to anticipate his needs before he vocalizes them, the only one entrusted with managing the most sensitive aspects of his business, having them readily accessible." While the words intended to be consoling, they instead served to underscore how little Klaus valued the contribution I made. The value of trust is severely diminished when coupled with constant criticism and the persistent implication that my position is easily replaceable. A noticeable shift occurred in Hans's expression, a subtle calculation discernible beneath the facade of his compassion. He told them that. I nodded. More tears threatened. "This morning, after working until midnight last night on a report he needed, after coming in at 6 a.m., to prepare for meetings, after doing everything exactly as he instructed. It's never enough. I am never enough." Hans reached out, his hand hovering over mine, but not quite touching it. "May I?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, and he took my hand in his. His touch, surprisingly warm and comforting, eased her apprehension. "You're mistaken," he stated firmly. "You are more than sufficient, Hannah. Klaus is being foolish if he can't see that." His words became the final straw, unleashing a torrent of emotion that had been held tightly within for an additional 10 months. In that small park surrounded by the muted sounds of late afternoon, Hans Meyer's quiet strength became invaluable. The simple act of holding my hand was a source of solace. He didn't attempt to control my tears or offer empty phrases, but simply sat beside me and stood up for beside me, steady assurance. His silent support provided the comfort I had desperately sought. Once my tears subsided and I regained control, I felt a surge of shame. "I'm sorry," I murmured, withdrawing my hand and wiping my face with a trembling hand. My reaction was completely unprofessional. He gently corrected me, his voice calm and understanding. "But it was human," he said, offering a handkerchief, a finely woven linen handkerchief embroidered with his initials to me. "You are entitled to be human, Hannah," even though Klaus seems to have forgotten that fact. My fingers dabbed nervously at my eyes, smearing the scant makeup I attempted to apply that morning. A return to work was imminent. My lunch break was drawing to a close. He extended an invitation I shared appealing. The invitation prompted a closer look. The concern in his dark eyes was genuine. The slight smile was reassuring. I doubted its propriety, yet the question persisted. He rose, matching my posture precisely. His demeanor relaxed, yet my attention was captivated entirely. The need for a confidant was profound, someone who grasped the heavy burdens of collaborating with the demanding Klaus Caruso. He assured me that it would remain purely professional, Two colleagues merely sharing a simple meal. I should have declined, anticipating the added complexity to an already difficult professional situation. But the loneliness had become unbearable. The lack of someone who understood the immense pressures of Klaus Caruso's demanding, often unreasonable expectations was simply too much to bear. Okay, I heard myself say. Dinner would be nice. His smile widened and transformed his face. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. Text me your address. He reached for his business card and then checked his eyes. Now take a longer lunch break. You deserve it. I walked back, feeling strangely lighter despite my earlier tears. Maybe Hans was right. Maybe I just needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. It was innocent, just a dinner among colleagues. The office was still quiet when I got back. Most people hadn't returned from lunch yet. I sat down at my desk and opened my emails. Tried to focus on work despite my earlier emotional breakdown. But my attention kept drifting to Hans' business card, to the promise of dinner and conversation, and someone who actually saw me as more. I didn't notice Klaus coming out of his office until he was standing right in front of my desk. I looked up sharply. My heart leapt at his sudden proximity in the throat. Where were you? His voice was cold and controlled, yet within those stormy gray eyes, something flickered, and an emotion I couldn't quite pinpoint. During lunch break, I said, trying to maintain a professional tone of voice despite the intensity of my still raw emotions, you said I could go. You've been gone 53 minutes. Your lunch break is 45. Of course, he had counted. I apologize. It won't happen again. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His gaze traveled over my face with an intensity that made my skin tingle. Could he see that I had been crying? Did it matter to him? Make sure it doesn't. I need the quarterly reports compiled by 5. He turned to head back to his office, and then he stopped, his back still facing me. There's something on your blouse, he observed. Mascara hung there after he left. The door shut behind him with a quiet click, a sound that seemed much more definitive than a loud slamming. My gaze fell to my cream-colored silk blouse, and there, as I'd anticipated, a small dark stain marred its surface. It was the result of him shook. Swiftly, I retrieved my emergency jacket from my bag and slipped it on, attempting to conceal the evidence of my near breakdown. I then immersed myself in my work, fueled by a determination to finish these reports well ahead of schedule to demonstrate my capabilities despite Klaus Caruso's clearly evident doubts. But as I worked, the memory of those stormy gray eyes lingered, relentlessly tracing the path they had taken across my face. The unsettling inflection in his voice when he commented on my mascara haunted me. It was probably nothing. Just another veiled criticism disguised as a mere observation. Another stark reminder that I hadn't met his impossibly high expectations. This incident underscores a fundamental aspect of human communication, how often we latch onto subtle cues, don't see what's spoken, small gestures are crushing us right now. That mascara-covered remark from Klaus was supposed to be derogatory. But Hannah's brain is searching for a why, a deeper meaning that might not be there. Humans crave complexity. They search for it relentlessly, even within acts of the most brutal cruelty. The alternative, that someone we admire or perhaps despise, or both, is simply a ruthless individual, is a truth far too painful to confront. That's what makes the dynamic between the two of them so fascinating and so human, I think. There was, however, something about that moment that felt significant, weighty, crucial in a manner that I struggled to fully express, in a manner that felt as if I had unknowingly traversed an invisible line, and from that point forward, nothing would ever truly be the same again. Those days after lunch with Hans had the feel of walking blind, a treacherous step at a time through a land full of hidden bombs. Somehow Klaus' standards, already impossibly high, reached a level of absurdity previously unknown. Every document needed 3 revisions instead of 1. Even the most basic meetings required such extensive preparation that it would have taxed the resources of a 5-person team. Every interaction was filled with criticism, delivered in that cold, controlled voice that, frankly, made me feel terrible. Wanted to scream and be consecrated at the same time. But the worst part wasn't the criticism. It was the way he looked at me now. Eyes like storm gray, They tracked every motion, the intensity so overwhelming it felt like a second skin, a suffocating, unrelenting pressure. I often caught him staring at me, particularly when he believed I wasn't paying attention. His expression was unreadable, but his focus was absolute. It was unsettling, suffocating, and completely at odds with his verbal disparagement. My dinner with Hans had been surprisingly pleasant. The restaurant, a quiet Italian place, was the setting for our meeting. He was charming and attentive, taking the time to ask about my life beyond work, about my family, and about my dreams. He made me laugh with tales of his early days working alongside Klaus, recounting their youthful ambition and tireless efforts in building their empire from the ground up, brick by brick, so to speak. He behaved like a perfect gentleman, escorted me to the door, and then, before he left, just offered a simple thank you for the nice evening. It was meant to be an innocent, forgettable matter, yet somehow Klaus was aware of the situation. "You're spending time with Hans." It wasn't a question. Klaus had received a summons to his office on Friday afternoon, 3 days following my dinner with his business associate. I found myself standing before his desk, my tightly clasped in front of me in a desperate attempt to conceal the tremor. I replied, "We had dinner, striving for neutrality. He'd been kind enough to invite me after my difficult day." A dangerous glint momentarily flashed in Klaus' eyes before his face hardened again. Hans is an extremely busy man. It's certain he has far more pressing matters occupying his time than entertaining my secretary. His condescending tone set my anger off. He probably simply values agreeable company that doesn't continually find fault with everything he does before I could prevent it, the words escaped me, and the infraction of professional conduct immediately filled me with regret. Klaus's eyes narrowed to slits. A muscle in his jaw jerked as he slowly rose to his feet. With the feline grace he's known for, he moved around the desk, positioning himself close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "So that's the real reason behind your behavior." His voice was dangerously soft, a low rumble that sent spine. "You're seeking validation from other sources because I refuse to pamper your every whim?" "I'm looking for basic human decency," I shot back. My professionalism crumbled under months of accumulated resentment. Something they apparently couldn't offer. "Basic human decency," he laughed. The sound was cold and humorless. "I pay you extraordinarily well, offering you opportunities that most people would fight, even die to obtain, and I trust you with information that could bring the downfall of empires. The absence of constant head-patting and unceasing compliments about how great you are, task after task, means I'm apparently devoid of fundamental human decency, according to some." The leniency in his tone made my cheeks burn. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "What did you mean, then?" His approach brought his cologne closer, enveloping me, making clear thinking quite difficult to achieve. "Explain to me, Hannah, what Hans offers you that is so lacking in our professional relationship." "Respect," I whispered. The word was barely audible, but it carried the weight of 18 months of repressed feelings. "He treats me as if I were important." Something shifted in Klaus' expression. A gawk in his seemingly controlled exterior gave way to the raw emotions beneath which he then just as quickly masked. If they weren't important, they would have disappeared months ago. Then why are they treating me like a disposable commodity? The question lingered in the air between us, burdened with implications neither of us were prepared to accept. Klaus stared at me. The intensity in his stormy gray eyes was overwhelming. It was capable of dismantling every defense I had meticulously built. For a brief moment, I hoped he would answer honestly, explaining the incessant criticism and the unattainable standards that have always plagued us. Instead, he stepped back. His professional mask slid firmly into place. "Because in this world, Hannah, everyone is replaceable. The moment you forget that," he stated, "is the moment you become vulnerable." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, confirming every fear and apprehension I had held about how he perceived me. A single nod was all I could manage. My throat was constricted, unable to produce any words. I turned to leave his office, but his voice stopped me. "Where are you going?" "Home, now. It's 6 p.m. Friday evening. Unless you require anything further from us." I refused to turn around. Couldn't face the idea of looking at him at that point in time. "Nothing that can't wait until Monday." A break. "Have a nice weekend, Henner." The dismissal was a given. I retraced my steps to my desk, collecting my belongings with the precise efficiency of a machine, and exited, refraining from any glance back towards his office door. As the elevator descended, each floor seemed to stretch out each stop, a brutal reminder of my transformation from the naive woman who, 18 months earlier, had accepted this position with a naive conviction that she could manage everything Klaus Caruso would demand. I was now a far different person. My phone buzzed as I stepped out into the cold November evening. A text from Hans. "How are you doing for dinner tomorrow?" I had forgotten the fact that I had previously agreed to meet with him again. He previously mentioned his desire to show me his favorite restaurant, a place he swore offered the best risotto within the city limits. I stared at the message, weighing my options, agreeing with another way of life. Despite the fact that I was unable to comprehend his interest in my personal time, the prospect of saying no fills me with the dread of being alone with my thoughts and the profound aching pain in my chest. "Yeah, looking forward to it," I replied. His answer came immediately. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. And Hannah, no matter what Klaus said today, remember that your worth is far greater than anything he'll ever acknowledge." I decided against asking where Hans knew that I had a really tough conversation just moments ago with Klaus. Whenever matters pertaining to the other man arose, the two men appeared to possess a connection that was practically telepathic in nature. Instead, I put my phone away and went home. Try not to picture stormy gray eyes and the way they regarded you when you declared, "Hans, treat me as though I were somebody." Saturday arrived with gray skies that matched my mood. That morning, I cleaned my apartment with such obsessive intensity that it bordered on mania. It felt as if diligently scrubbing the floors and meticulously organizing my closet might somehow bring order to the turbulent chaos of my emotions. At the precise hour of 7, when Hans arrived, my room and I stood transformed. I wore a stunning dress, a deep burgundy hue that I had acquired months in advance, yet remained untouched in my wardrobe. Hans' eyes widened in appreciation as I opened the door. "You look stunning," he said, offering me his arm. The color suited her beautifully. The restaurant itself was exactly as promised, intimate and elegant, without being pretentious in the slightest. We were seated at a corner window, a perfect location, offering both a sense of privacy and a wonderful view of the other diners. Without even asking, Hans ordered wine, an Italian vintage, undoubtedly costing more than I made in a week, and started a comfortable, engaging conversation, slowly drawing me out of my reserved demeanor. He inquired about my life prior to working for Klaus, and I recounted my experiences, sharing stories about my younger sister, Lena. Thanks to the generous salary I received, Lena was able to complete her final year of college. I also described the tragic loss of my parents in a car accident, which left me orphaned at a young age, forcing Lena to shoulder the responsibility of raising me entirely. I spoke about the aspirations I'd held to travel, to write, to pursue a more meaningful existence beyond the confines of managing someone else's extensive business empire. "They still could," Hans said, his dark eyes serious. "Those dreams don't have to die just because they work for Klaus, do they?" I took a sip of wine and felt it warm my chest. Between the hours of work and the exhaustion, I barely have the energy for anything else. When was the last time I wrote something creative, or traveled for pleasure instead of business, or even read a book that didn't involve corporate law or financial regulations? Then maybe it's time to consider other options. He reached across the table. His hand covered mine in a gesture that felt, "You're brilliant, Hannah. Any company in this city would be lucky to have you." I should have withdrawn my hand, professional boundaries in place, even though this was technically a private dinner. But his touch was warm, and his words were balm for wounds I'd been nursing for months. So I left my hand wherever it was and smiled, allowing myself this moment of connection. What I didn't see was the figure standing at the restaurant entrance, stormy gray eyes fixed on our table. With an expression so terrifying that it would have sent shivers down my spine, I would have seen him. I failed to observe how Klaus Caruso's hands formed into fists clenched tightly at his sides, or the dangerous calm that settled upon his facial features before he made the decision to turn and leave without ever approaching. But Hans saw it. I noted the slight grin, almost imperceptible, that flickered across his face as he looked towards the entrance, the satisfied, almost contented sparkle in his eyes before he shifted his focus back to me. I dismissed it as nothing, at the time so completely absorbed in the enjoyable evening that I failed to notice the subtle manipulations that were going on. As we concluded our dinner, Hans insisted on accompanying me back to my door to ensure my safety. This time he lingered a little longer when we arrived. "I enjoyed the evening," he said, his voice soft. "It is very uncommon to find someone who understands the pressures of our world, but who has not yet been corrupted by them." "Not yet," I raised an eyebrow. "You say corruption is inevitable in Klaus' orbit most of the time?" Something shifted in his expression. "But maybe you're different. It may be you, the one who makes their escape before this life relentlessly strips away every single good thing you yet hold dear." Before I could even manage a response, he leaned forward and gently pressed a soft kiss onto my cheek, for his lips lingered only a second longer than is strictly platonic. "Good night, Hannah. Sweet dreams." I watched him walk away. I unknowingly touched with my hand the precise spot where his lips had been. Confusion and something like guilt swirled in my chest. This was innocent, I told myself. Just two colleagues who had become friends, sharing meals and conversations. Nothing more. But the guilt lingered as I prepared for prayer. The sensation that I might have unintentionally crossed an invisible line, violated an unspoken rule, persisted despite my best efforts to dismiss it. It was irrational. Klaus and I weren't together. We barely had a functioning professional relationship. I owed him nothing except my work. Despite my hope for warmth, when I closed my eyes that night, I saw stormy gray eyes, not the gentle brown ones I'd expected. Monday came too quickly. My office was the place to be at 6:30 sharp. I grabbed my coffee, clutching it tightly. I couldn't live without it. The office floor of the executive board was empty and silent apart from the low hum of the computers and the muted sounds of the city filtering in from the windows. I went to my desk, opened my email, braced myself for demands impossible to fulfill, and acts of casual cruelty that felt inevitable this coming week. The door to Klaus's office was closed when I got there, but I knew he was in his office. The coat rack displayed his suit jacket readily visible through the glass walls, and I could make out papers stacked neatly upon his desk. He always arrived before me, no matter how early I arrived. It was as if he didn't sleep, didn't need to rest like normal people. I had been working for 30 minutes when his office door opened. Against the bright morning sun pouring through his windows, he stood silhouetted in the doorway, his expression inscrutable and impossible to decipher. "Hannah, come into my office now." Having saved my work, I went inside, my legs feeling uncertain and somewhat shaky, although I couldn't have pinpointed the reason. He closed the door behind me, and with that, the one spacious room now felt oppressively confined. "I saw her." The words were spoken with deadly calm. "Saturday night at Morello's with Hans." My heart stopped. We had dinner. As I mentioned, we were holding hands across the table. He interrupted. He maintained control over his voice, but there was a sharp edge to it that caused my heart to race. As he dropped her off at her apartment, he gave her a kiss. Heat flooded my cheeks, anger mixed with embarrassment. "Are you following me? I was at Morello's for a business dinner." Can you imagine my utter astonishment when I discovered my secretary and business partner ensconced quite cozily by a corner window? He approached each step measured and deliberate. "So let me ask you straight out, Hannah, what exactly is going on between you and Hans Wohns?" I answered with a firm nothing, though I could hear the tremor in my voice as I raised my chin. "We are friends. He was kind to me when I needed kindness." "Kindness?" Klaus laughed. The sound was sharp and bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes, although I don't see how my personal life is any of your business." He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the silver threads in his gray eyes. With painstaking care, I counted the almost invisible scars on his knuckles, the remnants of violence I wanted to avoid confronting. "The moment your private life touches my business partner, the moment it generates complications that could potentially disrupt our operations, it then becomes my concern." "How could a dinner with Hans affect theirs?" I demanded. Frustration overcame my usual caution. "Unless you're suggesting there's something unprofessional about, two colleagues becoming friends." Using the word friends, he spoke as if it tasted strangely bitter. "Do you really think that's what Hans wants? Friendship. What else could he want?" But even while asking the question, I sensed a subtle shift taking place within my understanding. I've always wondered how Hans seemed to know, without fail, when I'd had a difficult day with Klaus. The tentative questions he asked about my boss, It felt like his attention invariably came at the exact moment when I was most vulnerable and open to his influence. "You're a smart woman, Hannah." Klaus' voice softened slightly, though his posture remained rigid. "Use that intelligence. You find it strange that Hans suddenly took an interest in you after 18 months of practically ignoring your existence. Have you ever considered why his attention seems to always coincide perfectly with times of tension between us?" I meant to argue and to defend Hans's intentions, but doubt had entrenched itself and spread like cracks fracturing the glass of my certainty. "If you're suggesting that Hans is using me to get to you, then I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you, be careful." Something flickered across his face, almost like concern, before it disappeared behind his usual mask. "Hans Meyer is many things, but he's not straightforward. Every movement he makes serves a purpose. And you, I heard myself wonder, do your movements serve a purpose too? Could this be the reason she's been more difficult to deal with than usual lately?" His jaw tightened. "We don't discuss my behavior." "Why not? You're allowed to question my personal life, but hers is off limits." Yes, that one word was uttered with utter authority, since I, her employer, and she is my employee, quite clearly. The whole dynamic makes this conversation possible. Don't forget that. It stung, the reminder of my subordinate position, just as he undoubtedly hoped it would. I held my head high and collected the remnants of dignity I still possessed. "Do you need anything else, Mr. Crusoe? Or can I return to work?" Something like frustration crossed his face. "Yes, you can return to work." He walked back to his desk, dismissing me. "And Hannah, could you arrange a meeting with the Mere Industries team for Friday? All department heads, Hans included." I nodded and left his office. My head was spinning from the conversation. Was Hans really manipulating me? Alternatively, was Klaus merely jealous of any attention I received from other people? Being extremely possessive, despite his refusal to show me the most basic respect. The following week was folly. Every interaction with Klaus was charged with unspoken tension. Every casual conversation with Hans was laden with suspicion. I realized I was analyzing each word, each gesture, attempting to determine who was being truthful and who was engaged in some kind of game I didn't fully grasp. Hans continued his attentive demeanor, asking about my day, bringing me coffee when I looked tired, offering encouragement when Klaus' criticisms became particularly harsh. He was everything that Klaus was not. Gentle, considerate, open, acknowledging my work and my value. I kept thinking back to Klaus's words, reflecting on his comments about the careful timing and intended purpose, as well as the insidious manipulation disguised as a friendly act. I started noticing recurring patterns, ones I'd previously overlooked. It seemed Hans always appeared directly following a difficult interaction he had with Klaus. How it was that his seemingly innocent questions invariably circled back to the nature of my relationship with his business partner. How his attention made me feel valued, but also somehow left me indebted. I felt on Friday as though I was being torn apart by the opposing forces working against me. Every one of them declared they knew what was best for me, while, at the same time, potentially promoting their own interests. The meeting that Klaus had called loomed like a storm on the horizon, and I had a disturbing feeling that whatever would happen in that conference room would change everything. I had no idea how right I was. The conference room was a monument to power and intimidation. Large windows reaching from floor to ceiling offered a view of the city which looked like a game board spread out below. The massive mahogany table could easily accommodate 20 people. 8 of us occupied that space today. The main players, whoever Klaus and Hans were involved with in their chess game, I, obviously, was nothing more than an unaware pawn in their game. Throughout these meetings, I was seated in my standard location, slightly be right of Klaus, with my tablet readily available for note-taking and agenda management purposes. But today, it felt different. I sensed a tangible tension in the air, and I observed how meticulously Hans and Klaus were watching each other across the table. Their polite smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming," Klaus began. His voice carried that dangerous calm that I had come to recognize as a warning sign. I convened this meeting in order to address a number of concerns that have come to my attention concerning the Elblicksiedlung project. The Elblick project was Hans' baby, a massive commercial and residential complex that was set to transform an entire neighborhood. I had prepared a large number of documents concerning this, and knew every financial forecast and schedule off by heart. But Clausen subtly indicated that this was not your typical progress report. I could sense his worry. Hans's smile held firm, but I couldn't help but notice the mild strain in his shoulders. The project is proceeding exactly according to plan, perhaps even ahead of schedule in some areas. Financially, yes. Klaus reclined in his chair, a predator in the shadows, patiently waiting for the moment to strike. I managed to gather some interesting information regarding their construction partners, particularly concerning their associations with certain families whom we had consistently and carefully maintained a distance from. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I glanced around the table and saw the other executives shift uncomfortably, clearly sensing the dangerous undercurrent. This wasn't really about construction partners. This was a personal power play disguised as business. I'm not sure what you were implying, Hans said cautiously. All of our partners were vetted according to standard protocols. Standard protocols that somehow overlooked the fact that Richterbau had direct ties to the Richter organization. Klaus's voice remained calm, but his eyes had hardened to steel. The same Richters we've been dealing with over territorial disputes. The unexpected occurrence was truly regrettable. I instantly ceased my typing, my fingers paralyzed over the tablet. The Richter family represented a serious threat literally and figuratively. Their influence extended to areas of the city, directly impacting Klaus's businesses. And our dealings with them had always been precarious, bordering on dangerous. If Hans had entered into undisclosed business agreements with companies associated with the Richters, such an action would represent either an astounding lack of caution or a purposeful act of defiance, a deliberate provocation. If it was a simple mistake, we can resolve it, Hans stated smoothly. The replacement of the construction partners and the absorbing of financial impact is a necessary step. It's not ideal, to be sure, but it is entirely manageable, wouldn't you agree? Klaus tilted his head slightly, subtle but significant. From my perspective, this seems less like an accidental error and more like a calculated maneuver. Any unsettling thought is taking hold within me what other carefully orchestrated actions might be occurring without my knowledge. The underlying message hung heavy and inescapable in the air. Hans' smile finally vanished, replaced by a harder, more serious expression. If you have anything to say, Klaus, please speak plainly. He nodded. Klaus allowed his eyes to scan the room before settling back on Hans. Over the past month, they've invested a considerable amount of time with my executive secretary. They've taken her out for dinners, provided her with considerable emotional support and reassurance, ensuring she felt both valued and truly appreciated. It's all been presented in a manner that seems exceptionally thoughtful and considerate. Except for the pause, the one that highlighted a statement that 10 months prior they wouldn't have been able to pick her out of a lineup, even if their lives had depended on it. My stomach plummeted. Every single line. At that moment, the entire room focused its attention on me, and I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. This couldn't be true. Klaus didn't mention my personal life whatsoever before the whole board management team. Heck count. Hans answered that Hannah was indeed a remarkable woman, his voice still under complete control. Months of effort went into me noticing what they had been blind to all along. Because she is intelligent, capable, and deserves far better treatment than her constant criticism. How noble of them to notice that. Klaus's voice could have cut glass. Now tell me, when did Hans' unexpected interest in Hannah's welfare begin? Was it before or after our disagreement regarding the Hoffenblick acquisition? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The Hoffenblick acquisition had been a major point of contention between Klaus and Hans 2 months ago, right around the time Hans had found me crying in the park. I assumed that the timing was a mere coincidence and that Hans's kindness was genuine and heartfelt. Now I wasn't so sure. The two things are completely unrelated, Hans said. But I heard the lie in his voice. Everyone in this room. Is that you? Klaus stood up slowly. His large frame seemed to fill the entire room. From my perspective, this looks considerably less like a simple mistake and more like a carefully planned strategic move. And I'm gradually beginning to wonder what other carefully calculated moves might be happening right under my nose. It looks as if they've managed to identify a weakness and then proceed to exploit it. They had observed that Hannah and I have a somewhat complicated working relationship, and they saw an opening to exploit. Get close to her, gain her road trust, maybe learn a few things about my operations in the process, and as a bonus, distract me with jealousy while you make your real moves behind my back. The word jealousy stayed in my head, but I hardly managed to process it. I had become too absorbed in examining every interaction with Hans through this new perspective, allowing me to see manipulation where I previously perceived kindness. The careful questions about Klaus's schedule, the interest in which clients he was preparing documents for, his approach of softly prompting me to share frustrations concerning my job. I had been so close. Hans rose, echoing the gesture of his counterpart. An interesting theory, he observed. But on what basis is founded? Your paranoia. Telephone records showing regular contact with Victor Richter. Financial transactions this way. And finally, the curious coincidence of dining with Herner, only to find yourself amongst prominent members of the Richter family. Klaus' voice remained calm, almost conversational, but the veiled threat was unmistakable. You're not as clever as you think, Hans, he remarked, his gaze intense. I stood, my leg shaky, my tablet threatening to slip from my grasp. I apologize, I stammered, but my attempt at an apology was immediately rebuffed. Sit down, Hannah, Klaus commanded sharply. No, I whispered, the word slipping out before I could control it. Years of simmering resentment and frustration finally burst forth. I will not be treated as a pawn in your game, I declared. I'm a human being, not a strategic asset that can be exploited or protected at your whim. I turned and walked toward closing the door. I desperately needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room and the many eyes watching my humiliation. But Hans's voice stopped me. Hannah, wait, let me explain. Explain what? I whirled around. Tears threatened, but anger held them at bay. Detail how they manipulated me, capitalizing on my loneliness and frustration, showing signs of care while actually only collecting information for their own purposes without any real regard for my feelings. Their way of making me feel so valuable, despite the fact that I was actually nothing more than a tool being used. It wasn't the case, Hans insisted, but the look on his face told a different story. There was guilt and calculation and the cold realization that I had been caught. But that was it. The realization settled over me with a crushing weight. It was all they were saying, that I deserved something better, that Klaus just didn't appreciate me. It was all just a strategy. They deliberately played upon my insecurities in order to get close to him. I looked at Klaus, who stood rigidly beside his chair, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with something that might have been enough taunting or anger or something else entirely. And they couldn't simply tell me what they suspected might be the case. They had to let me find out publicly in front of the entire executive team. Heaven forbid, but they are actually having a real conversation with me, as if I were a human being, and not simply an employee. Hannah, Klaus began, but I cut him off. No, they don't have to explain anything either. Not now. I glanced from one to the other, these two powerful men who had employed me as a tool to fight their personal battle. They are both manipulative and cruel in their own ways. The only difference is that Hans pretended to be friendly while he was doing it. I walked out of the conference room without waiting for any further instructions or official dismissal, my legs feeling utterly detached and unresponsive to my own will. Trembling, my hands took my purse and coat. The few employees seeing my departure wore expressions I hardly noticed. It was a silent exit, a quick goodbye, no, it was a quick goodbye, no words. The elevator ride down felt endless. Every floor a reminder of how high I had climbed, just to realizing that the view wasn't worth the price. I had sacrificed so much for this job. The state of my social life, my creative outlets and leanness, concern regarding my recent weight loss, and extreme tiredness. And for what? It was intolerable to be a mere pawn in the power games of these men who treated me as nothing more than a useful tool, a means to their ends. I left the building into the cold afternoon air. Although I didn't know where I was going, I knew for certain that I couldn't stay. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Texts and calls from Klaus and Hans, which I ignored. Are you supposed to revel in the chaos you had created? Are you supposed to sort out your power dynamic without me? I wound up in the same park where Hans had found me crying, just as before. The bitter irony was not lost on me. Returning to the same bench, I stared in at the small trees and the overcast sky, finally letting myself take in and process everything that had just unfolded. Hans had used me. That hurt, but in retrospect, it wasn't surprising. I had known from the beginning that his world was one of strategy and manipulation. I simply had the bad luck to think that I was, for some reason, exempt from the rules. But Klaus, it was more complicated. His expose of Hans' manipulation strongly suggested that he had been discreetly observing and investigating, all the while safeguarding himself through his own rather warped methods. Yet he also permitted me to fall into the trap, allowing my humiliation to occur instead of simply advising me in private. Maybe he had tried to give me a warning in a manner that was distinctly his own. The comments about the timing and Hans's intentions, the tension whenever Hans's name was mentioned, the barely controlled anger when he had seen us at dinner. I dismissed everything as nothing more than obsession or paranoia, and I never once considered the possibility that he might have actually been trying to protect me. But protection shouldn't come with constant criticism. Care shouldn't manifest itself as cruelty. The way Klaus would show that he was purported looking out for me was, to put it mildly, rather unusual. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked at it. A text from Klaus. "We need to talk. Not here, in my apartment, tonight, please." That surprised me. After 18 months, I was quite unsure whether I'd ever heard Klaus Caruso utter the word please even in the smallest request. It was always orders and expectations, never begging. I really should have ignored the whole thing. Gone straight home, packed my belongings, and then never looked back once. I longed to begin a new life far away from the complicated web Klaus and Hans have created in their dangerous world. But underneath the anger and pain was something else. Could it be curiosity? Perhaps a deep-seated need for closure. Or could it be a perverse part of me, a shadowy aspect that still craved answers from the man who had relentlessly criticized me daily? A man who, seemingly, had been protecting me from a betrayal I had been too blind to perceive. I texted back at 8 p.m. "This has to be worth it," and his response came immediately. "It will. I promise." Another promise from Klaus Caruso. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but I would show up anyway because, despite everything, despite the manipulation and anger and humiliation, I had to understand, had to know if there was any truth to all the lies or if I really was as replaceable as he said, always said. The afternoon lay ahead of me, stretching out with hours that I had to waste until the meeting. I couldn't go back to the office. Not today, maybe never. Therefore, I departed, letting the biting November air help to clarify my thoughts as I struggled to decide what I would say when I encountered Klaus later that evening. Because one thing was certain: if I were to leave this job and this man, it would be on my own terms, with all my questions answered and all my complaints fully aired. Klaus Caruso wanted to talk, all right, but he would hear some truths he had been avoiding for 18 months. If he found what I said unpalatable, he was more than welcome to add it to his already extensive inventory of my perceived flaws. The luxurious penthouse owned by Klaus Penthouse comprised the top 2 floors of a building I had, remarkably, never entered despite our 18-month collaborative relationship. The address that he had sent me via text message was situated in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city. The kind of place where security was ever present, but invisible, where wealth whispered instead of screamed. The doorman recognized my name when I asked for it, arrived at 7:85 p.m. and ushered me inside with cool efficiency. Access to the elevator was via a key card, which he provided me with explicit instructions to return to the reception desk before departing. The climb up was so gentle and quiet, it gave me more than enough time to seriously reconsider my decision. The doors opened directly into Klaus's apartment, and I stepped into a room that was more quintessential. All clean lines and muted colors, expensive but not ostentatious, beautiful in its precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off the city lights below, and despite the November chill, I could see a private terrace through the glass. "They've come." Hearing Klaus' voice caused me to turn around. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the bright city lights. He had traded his professional suit for dark jeans and a black sweater, the latter emphasizing his broad shoulders. His casual attire struck me as unusual, making him seem somehow more approachable and human. I responded by saying I'd stay put. I remained near the elevator, deliberately maintaining some distance. You wanted to talk, so I expected you to initiate the conversation. He moved to the small bar and poured 2 drinks, what looked like whiskey, into separate glasses. He then offered me one, which I accepted more out of a need to occupy my hands than from a genuine thirst. He then returned to the window, stopped. He returned to the window. For this afternoon, for publicly exposing Hans' manipulation instead of sorting it out in private. You deserve better than that. I nodded slowly. The whiskey tasted bitter on my tongue. I deserve much better. Analysis commentary, a sugar-coated walk through the story. It's the subtle yet unrelenting psychological burden that Hannah is experiencing which is most striking to me. Klaus's criticism is never just professional. It always goes deeper, gnawing at her self-esteem, and then Hans comes in, who seems to recognize exactly these wounds. The irony lies in the fact that Klaus's tough love, if one can call it that, ultimately protects her, whereas Hans's kindness serves to lure her into a trap. It highlights just how complex and confusing human relationships can be, especially when the exercise of power comes into play. At times, what seems good to us may not actually be beneficial for our well-being. Or, original paragraph approx. 45% through the story. There were times when, upon returning home after a long day and entering my empty apartment, I was struck by the almost overwhelming loudness of the echo from my own footsteps. These moments always brought back cherished memories of summer evenings spent at my grandparents' house. The aroma of damp wood and beeswax permeated their old hallway. The soft crackling of the radio came from the kitchen, where Grandma was making jam. Meanwhile, Grandpa sat comfortably in his rocking chair telling a story that he had undoubtedly recounted 100 times before. A warmth that came not only from the wood-burning stove, but from the certainty of belonging. What remained now of that warmth was merely a distant memory, an image I occasionally brought to mind in an effort to dispel the chilling cold that had, over the past few years, taken root within me. Analysis commentary 2M approx. 65% through the story. We frequently make a fundamental mistake. We overestimate our ability to accurately discern the underlying intentions of other people. Hannah perceived Hans's kindness as just that. Kindness. Genuine care. Yet, within the world, as Klaus describes it, one saturated with manipulation and strategy, it's simply not easy. What Klaus is attempting to convey is this cruel reality, though he does so in the most awkward and hurtful way conceivable. The brutality of the way he unveils the connections is undeniable, but it's necessary to finally open Hannah's eyes. I wonder how much pain one is allowed to inflict on someone in order to protect them. First catch Jason's perspective, Klaus Frisma's perspective during the restaurant visit. I'd been back at Morelos Villas every third evening of the week, one of those stylish, over-the-top Italian places with the experience of being seen mattered more than the food itself. My scheduled business meeting with Senator Bachman was taking a considerable amount of time. I listened with half an ear as he lectured on the new building regulations for the city center, but my gaze involuntarily wandered to the corner window where Hannah was sitting with Hans. In the last few days, Lena had described their meetings to me, her narrative imbued with characteristic naivete, a quality I sometimes considered but never voiced aloud. She mentioned Hans' thoughtful gestures, the effortless way in which he had her laughing. I saw Hannah laugh. The genuine, unrestrained laugh was something I had never before heard in my office. In the dim light, her dress, a rich wine red, absorbed the gloom, leaving her skin appearing pale and delicate. Hans leaned forward, his hand on hers. A stab hit me, sharp, unexpected. Instead of the anger I expected, I felt a more intense, burning worry. I had seen Hans's game from the beginning, had felt the strings he was pulling. I knew him for years. I was intimately familiar with his methods and his lack of scruples. He'd found a vulnerability, Hannah's insecurity, her hunger for validation, and cleverly used it as a lure to get her to fall for his scheme. I described it as a strategic asset, yes, but the meaning I intended was quite different. I attempted to caution her in my own unique way, to steal her heart, but she couldn't grasp the language I used. I observed Hans glance dart towards the entrance, followed by a fleeting, triumphant grin, which caused my stomach to churn. He knew I was here. He was playing a game where Hannah would be the prize, and I had unfortunately allowed her to get within his grasp. The senator finished his sentence, but I didn't hear him anymore. I had to get out of here. Get out before I did something I couldn't take back. Conclusion, 20,288 words. I view the black mascara smudge on Hannah's cream blouse, which Klaus remarks upon, and the close of the first part as significant beyond its mere cosmetic nature. It holds deeper meaning. He embodies the entire chaotic dynamic that exists between the main characters. He's revealing proof of Hannah's emotional collapse, yet also of Hans's consoling gesture, which subsequently reveals itself as part of an intention. Ironically, his insignificant spot draws Klaus's attention and momentarily permits his simmering uneasiness, or whatever it may be, concealed behind his unemotional exterior, to briefly emerge to the surface. This is the crucial moment. The carefully constructed wall of professionalism begins to crumble, allowing personal emotions to surface in a way that neither of them is prepared to acknowledge. Despite the complexities, Hannah's final decision to go to Klaus' penthouse is one of those choices that a reader might not completely grasp intellectually, but which resonates profoundly on a deeper emotional level. She knows she's been used. She's hurt and angry, but an undeniable and rather complicated attraction to Klaus exists, along with a deep, almost desperate need for clarification. It's not logical, it's human. Which of us has never succumbed to summons designed to caution us, drawn instead by the compelling need to discover the truth, regardless of its potential to cause pain? Do you think that Hannah will find the answer she's looking for? Or will she find herself increasingly entangled in this dangerous game? I swallowed a small amount of the whiskey, felt it burning down my throat, and mentally sealed away 18 months during which I was treated as if I were perpetually letting him down, despite having given everything I possessed. His jaw tightened. I never said they were disappointing. They didn't have to say that. My voice was an icy breath. I found it embedded in each and every criticism, revision, and reminder, a constant undercurrent emphasizing my dispensability. I set the glass down on a nearby table with more force than necessary. Have you even a vague notion of what it means to work under someone who creates the impression that you are continuously failing, regardless of how much effort you dedicate? Yes, I do. He turned fully toward me. I did. The words caught me off guard. Klaus seldom discussed his family, his past, or anything personal. He rarely opened up about such things. My father was the same. His voice was deeper now, less controlled. Nothing was ever good enough. Each success resulted in a list of things that could have been improved upon. He died believing me to be inadequate. A chill ran down my spine. The parallel was obvious, painfully obvious. Consequently, you decided to replicate this pattern when dealing with your Saturn. I made a decision to insist on excellence because in my world, mediocrity directly leads to death. His voice hardened slightly. Each missed error, each carefully observed detail, and every problem you resolve before it escalates into a crisis, all these things are absolutely essential to keeping us all alive, Hannah. The criticism wasn't focused on their disappointing performance. Its purpose was to maintain their alertness by making me feel worthless. The question, cutting through the heavy, hushed atmosphere, ensured they never became complacent. His deliberate step closer only intensified my internal struggle. I fought the urge to retreat, my feet rooted to the spot. You wish to know the truth? I asked, the irony palpable, thick as frost on a cold. The actual reason behind my rigorous treatment. Please enlighten me. The sarcasm, thin and brittle like ice, was inescapable. Because they are brilliant and capable individuals. His stormy gray eyes locked onto mine, their intensity unsettling and almost painful. Each day they spend in their position is a day wasted, a day spent not actively pursuing something better, something more secure, something that will not leave them vulnerable to the calculated actions of men like Hans, men who view them as nothing more than easily replaceable tools. He exhaled softly, a quiet act of resignation. My hope rested on the belief that with sufficient pressure, consistent criticism, and persistent reminders of their expendability, they would inevitably tire of the constant pressure and eventually seek a more satisfying situation, and eventually to pack your bags and go to find a nice normal job with a nice normal boss who would genuinely appreciate your work without ever jeopardizing your safety or well-being. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. My stomach clenched. This is the most twisted logic I've ever heard. Welcome to my world. A flicker of bitter mockery touched his face, so fleeting. I wondered if it was merely a figment of my imagination. A situation where acts of protection resemble cruelty and caring translates into distancing. No. I held up a hand to stop him. Don't try to make your behavior sound noble. If you genuinely wish to safeguard me, 1,000 more effective approaches exist than causing me to believe I am unworthy of your protection. You're right. He expelled his breath heavily, his hand passing through his dark hair, such an unusual gesture. I found myself having to blink to clear my vision. I handled it badly. I handle everything badly when it comes to her. When it comes to me, what's the point mean? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze falling to the whiskey in his glass. The tone of his voice, when he spoke out, was deeper and more vulnerable than I had ever known before. You really don't know, do you? How difficult it was to have them standing right outside my office every day. It took many, many reminders for me to accept that they are my employees and that any crossing of that line would be utterly inappropriate and with catastrophic consequences. How much restraint it took not to. He paused, his jaw tightening. My heart was pounding against my ribs, faster than I thought was healthy. Not what? Not doing this. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. With his free hand, he gently caressed my face. His touch was surprisingly soft and delicate. It escaped me to say that you've been driving me crazy ever since the day I first hired you. It was difficult to accept that every piece of criticism in some way reflected my own frustrations. I longed for something I couldn't possess. I could have backed down. I could have slapped him across the face. I could have insisted that he immediately point out whether it was yet another manipulative tactic remained unclear. But I was left utterly paralyzed, captivated by the intensity of his gaze and the comforting warmth of his hand resting upon my skin. They wanted to fire me so I'd leave. I whispered. The pieces were finally falling into place, but they couldn't do it because I need them, Henner. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, a tiny movement that made my skin tingle. Despite my better judgment, despite knowing I should keep my hands off them. I need to see them every day, hear their voices, watch them, handle everything I throw at them with grace and competence. Dantins. It's selfish and wrong, and I'm not proud of it. He took a deep breath, but there it is. The ugly truth. And Hans, the manipulation. Klaus's expression darkened. I've suspected for weeks that he's been using them to distract me while he makes his real moves. The Vitelli connections, the questionable partnerships. The way he always seemed to know things he shouldn't when I saw them. With him in that restaurant, the way they looked at him like he was some kind of savior. His hand tightened slightly on my face. I wanted to tear him apart. They were jealous. It wasn't a question, a sharp realization. Insane. No hesitation, no attempt to hide it. I acted not out of any claim I held over them, but because I witnessed him providing them with everything I simply couldn't. All the things they deserved, the attention, the kindness, the validation. These I struggled to offer, clearing my throat with a stubborn, almost fear-ridden hesitation before finally giving them. I stepped away from his touch, needing a moment to myself to think clearly. This doesn't make sense. You are Klaus Caruso. You could have any woman you wanted. Why are you fixated on your secretary, the one you supposedly want to get rid of? Because these other women want Klaus Caruso, the boss, the powerful man, the dangerous reputation. He put down his glass and turned to the windows, his reflection ghostly against the city lights. You are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen through all this. Who asks if I've eaten when I work late? He notices, you see, that I drink my coffee black and without sugar. No. And he doesn't shrink back when I lose my temper because he understands that the anger isn't really meant for him. How would I ever know that, given that you're always criticizing everything I do? Because they're smart enough to realize that my harshest criticism comes after they've done something exceptionally well. He looked back at me after they had demonstrated once more that you are indeed too good for this position and this lifestyle. Wouldn't you agree? I get defensive and lash out when you point out that I don't deserve you in my world absolutely nowhere. The vulnerability in his confession was almost harder to process than Hans's betrayal. This was Klaus Caruso admitting weakness. Emotions recognized a carefully constructed mask came down when he had guarded so well. So what now? I asked, suddenly exhausted. Where do we go from here? The decision is entirely yours. He moved closer again, but this time he did not touch me. You could leave right now. I would write a letter of recommendation for you, which would easily get you a job anywhere in this city. I would make certain that you are financially secure, that Lena's university tuition is fully covered. You could begin anew, far away from me and my world, and all the complexities that go along with it. Or, his words were soft but weighed down with a significant meaning, you could stay. He paused, seeming to select his words carefully, not merely as my secretary, but as someone I am trying to be better for. Someone who motivates me to strive for improvement, even if I likely will fail spectacularly in my endeavor. My breath hitched. What exactly are you asking of me? I am asking you to give me an opportunity to prove that I am capable of being more than the harsh boss who made you cry. I am requesting time to show you that underneath all the criticism and distance there is a man who cares about you more than he is willing to acknowledge. His hand went up again, this time brushing against her, barely my cheek. I'm not asking you to leave, Hannah. Not yet. I can't tell them until they've learned the whole truth about what they mean to me. I should have said no, should have realized that this was just another form of manipulation, different from Hans, but potentially more dangerous because I wanted to believe it so badly. Yet standing in his apartment, seeing vulnerability within eyes that normally displayed only absolute control, I was unable to remain steady. I wavered. I need some time, I finally said, to think carefully about all of this, to figure out what I truly desire beyond simply reacting to the manipulative tactics employed against me. Take all the time you need. But Hannah, irrespective of the decision you reach, understand that you were never a replacement, never something easily dispensed with. You were always... He paused, his jaw muscles drawing taut. Always what? Everything, he whispered quietly. You were always everything. The weight of months of unspoken tension and the complexity of our emotions bore down on us. His confession lay heavy in the air. I reached for my purse, needing to escape the situation before I made the mistake of wholeheartedly trusting him. A mistake I knew I might regret. I had to go. He nodded, making no attempt to dissuade me. However, as I reached the elevator doors, I heard his voice calling out to me once more. Han, thank you so much for coming over tonight and for listening. It means more than they know. I stepped into the elevator without responding. My head was a whirlwind of everything that had been said and subtly implied during our conversation. The descent into the lobby seemed to stretch endlessly, providing ample time, perhaps even excessive time, to process Klaus's confessions and my own confused and rather disoriented reactions to his words. Once outside, the doorman swiftly hailed me a taxi and I rode home in silence, staring out the window at the shimmering lights of the city. The whole situation seemed utterly impossible to grasp. It felt unreal, a nightmare I couldn't quite wake from. Hans had clearly manipulated me. His motives were evident. But the proposition Klaus presented felt almost impossibly complex and potentially far more problematic. Months of misunderstandings and deceptive signals had underlain this relationship. Cruelty disguised as protection, distance as a veiled longing, creating a fragile and ultimately unstable dynamic. Could I trust him? Could I trust myself around him? Alternatively, was I just exchanging one form of manipulation for another, this time with better packaging? Reaching my apartment finally, I sank onto my sofa completely without any answers to the questions I faced. I saw on my phone that I had missed calls from Hans and Klaus, along with some unread messages. Tomorrow I would have to make decisions. I was forced to spend the night wrestling with the revealed truth, trying to work out what the heck I was going to do with it. Because one thing was for sure, I couldn't go back to the way it was. It involved deciding whether to walk away entirely or to explore the possibility of a relationship with Klaus that transcended the confines of the professional roles as boss and secretary. I had to chart my own course, guided by my own aspirations, not by the pressures of their manipulative attempts. The question was, what did I actually want? It was Monday morning and I called in sick, a decision I hadn't made once in the previous 18 months. There was a noticeable element of surprise in the voice of Klaus' assistant, the person who typically stepped in whenever I was absent when I requested a personal day off. I pondered the explanation Klaus might have offered for the abrupt conclusion to Friday's meeting and what rumors were being spread about the secretary who had so dramatically stormed out during the board session. I spent the day in my apartment trying to write down everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it. The list grew longer and longer. Hans' manipulation, Klaus' confession, 18 months of complicated emotions that I had suppressed. By evening, I was no closer to clarity than I had been the night before. My phone rang on Tuesday morning. Klaus, not his assistant. 3 phone rings went by before I finally looked at his name displayed on the screen and answered the call. Hannah. His voice held nothing but my name, yet I could clearly hear the relief in it. Are you okay? Define okay. Fair enough. A pause. Are you coming in today? I don't know yet. I snuggled myself into my sofa, the telephone pressed firmly against my ear. I don't know if I can face it all. The whispers, the judgment. Hans. Hans is in the office. He's been temporarily tasked with overseeing the expansion project currently underway in Hamburg. He'll be there for the foreseeable future. Relief and something else flooded through me. They've sent him away. Rather than continuing to engage in his games on my territory, I've relocated him to where his attention should have been focused all along. Klaus' voice had an edge to it. But Hannah, I need you to know this. If you decide not to come back, I'll understand. I'll help you in any way I can. He softly cleared his throat. But selfishly, I hope that they will give me an opportunity to demonstrate to them that last Friday marked the beginning. Not an end. A beginning of what? To determine the authenticity of the feelings that have developed between us over the past 18 months, it requires honesty and that they be treated with the respect and consideration they deserve, distinguishing between real connection and mere office stress that seems significant. My heart pounded at his directness. And when I come back, what changes? Everything and nothing. I heard him exhale. Your job stays the same. You're still my executive secretary because you're phenomenal at it. But the criticism stops. The emotional distance stops. My act of pretending I don't care about you beyond your professional capabilities is over. That's a lot of change. It's necessary change, Henner. I'm not going to lie to you. I find it challenging to express my feelings openly and to navigate relationships that are important to me. I'm sure I will make mistakes repeatedly, but I am prepared to give it a go if you agreed to do the same. I should have refused the opportunity, should have known that relationships in the workplace, especially those marked by significant power differences, were disasters waiting to occur. But a rebellious, perhaps even traitorous part of me yearned to believe in the opportunity presented. I need ground rules, I heard myself say. Name them. In the first place, complete honesty. No more games. No more manipulation. If you have any doubts about something or someone, please share them with me directly, rather than leaving me blindfolded in these situations. Okay. Second, respect. I'm not just your employee. I'm a human being with thoughts and feelings and boundaries. The fact that they're paying my salary doesn't give them the right to cross those lines. Understood. Though I want to make it clear that I reserve the right to gently challenge the limits you might be employing to protect yourself from harm. Sometimes those walls need to be questioned. The distinction made me pause. Fair. Third, discretion. Whatever this is, stay private. I don't want people to think I slept my way into my position. Anyone who knows your job knows that's impossible. His voice warmed slightly. But yes, maintaining discretion is absolutely essential, not only to safeguard her reputation, but also for her personal safety. The less people are aware of your significance to me, the less they can successfully leverage that against me. I was left with chills by the memory of his dangerous world. Speaking of which, that's Rule 6. You tell me what I'm really getting into. Not one sugar-coated version of their business operations, and absolutely no shielding from ugly truths. If staying around them jeopardizes my safety, I have a right to know with precision what that danger entails. Silence stretched so long, I thought he'd hung up. This, ultimately, is the rule to which I give my consent with the greatest reluctance. The hesitation isn't about a lack of honesty, but rather the anticipation that once the full truth is known, I might leave. I finished his sentence. That's my choice, Klaus. But I'm not meeting you unless I have all the information, otherwise I won't show up. Another long pause. Okay? Full transparency about my business and its implications. But Hannah, it's ugly. Uglier than you probably imagine. I can handle ugly. What I can't stand is being kept in the dark while people like Hans manipulate me. Then we have a deal. His voice held both relief and resignation. 4 rules: absolute honesty, mutual respect, discretion, and complete transparency about my world. Anything else? One more thing. I want to see Hans again. I absolutely need to hear his explanation. His excuse, whatever flimsy justification he has managed to fabricate. I absolutely must make eye contact with him and then understand why he did what he did. I expected Klaus to argue, to refuse to let me near Hans. Instead, I'll handle the arrangements, but I won't be doing it alone. I'll be there to protect myself, and perhaps even to act as a deterrent to him. Is that a problem? I paused, thinking to myself. No, actually, it might help to keep things on a civil footing. In that case, I'll arrange it for this week. Hannah, does that mean you're coming back? I am coming back on Wednesday to have a personal conversation. The goal is to determine if this new dynamic is actually feasible. After taking a deep breath, I decided to share some truths with you, truths that you may find difficult to accept. I'm looking forward to it. Warmth filled his voice. See you on Wednesday, Hannah. When we had finished speaking on the phone, I sat there for a really long time, just staring at my phone. What was I doing? I readily agreed to investigate something with my boss, a man whose world seemed to encompass violence and danger, facets I still struggled to fully understand. To someone who'd confessed to being incredibly bad at relationships and who had warned me that I'd probably be unintentionally hurt but underneath the fear and doubt was something else. It was a mixture of curiosity and hope, a thrilling possibility that Klaus and my broken self might somehow fit together in a way that felt right and made sense. Lena called that afternoon. With her usual flawless timing, her video chat would invariably appear just when I was facing a crisis. You look terrible, she announced by way of greeting. So what's going on? Did that awful boss of yours finally reach your breaking point? I had been a scale with Lena about my work situation. I wanted to spare her the worry, but the look of concern on her face compelled me to tell her everything. Hans' manipulation, the confrontation, Klaus' confession. She listened in silence. Her expression grew more incredulous with each revelation. After I had finished speaking, she said, "Let me be sure I understand this correctly. 10 months long, your boss treated you cruelly because he was attracted to you and didn't know how to cope with those feelings he had for you. And now you're thinking about dating him?" Not dating. Exactly. We are more exploring the possibility, the potential, if you will, that we could be compatible outside of our work. Anna. Lena's voice took on that big sister tone, even though she was 4 years younger. This is dating, and it sounds like the most chaotic situation ever. I know, but you're going to do it anyway. I think so. Maybe. I don't know. I rubbed my face wearily. Is this completely crazy? Probably. Lena's expression softened. But you've been different these past 18 months. More driven, yes, but also, in a strange way, more alive. As if working for this man has challenged you in ways that have made you grow. If this is partly due to unresolved feelings between you, then maybe it's worth exploring. Just be careful, okay? He sounds complicated. Complicated is putting it mildly. And make sure he treats you well. I don't care how powerful he is. If he brings tears to your eyes again, I'm coming over there and I'll be scratching the heck out of his expensive car. I laughed, anyway. Okay, deal. I will let you know if I need your help as a getaway driver. We chatted for a further hour, and once we finished, I felt more calm and centered than before. Lena was right. Klaus was complicated, and this situation was chaotic. For my whole life, though, I had always played it safe, choosing the responsible path and ensuring that everyone else's needs were met. Perhaps the time had come to do something purely because I felt like doing it. Consequences be damned. Wednesday morning came too quickly. I paid extra attention to my attire, carefully selecting a dark gray dress, one that was both professional and flattering my armor, ready to face whatever the day might throw at me. The ride in the elevator up to the executive floor seemed to drag on for much longer than usual. and I was aware of the stares I received when I exited. Apparently, Friday's drama had become office gossip. Withdrawing my attention from their looks, I went to my desk and initiated the computer startup procedure, demonstrating my expertise. I observed Klaus's office door was closed, yet his presence inside was unmistakable through the glass partitions. Even this early in the day, he was already working diligently. He must have sensed my approach, because he raised his head. His stormy gray eyes found mine through the glass. He got up from his chair and walked towards his door. He opened it, but then he stopped short of stepping into the common area. "Hannah, welcome back." Though his voice remained professionally neutral, his eyes conveyed a different message. "May I have you in my office?" I retrieved my tablet and entered honored, very much aware of the inquisitive looks that pursued me as I made my way inside. He closed the door behind me, and suddenly we were alone for the first time since he'd moved into his apartment. "How are you?" he asked, and the genuine concern in his voice made my defenses falter, leaving me frankly confused and anxious and questioning all my life choices. I directly met his gaze, but for now here is perfectly sufficient. He gestured toward the seating area by his windows, instead of the formal chairs in front of his desk. Although just a small gesture, it clearly showed a desire to create a brand new dynamic. "Coffee, please." From the coffee machine tucked away in the corner, he carefully poured 2 cups. He already knew, without having to ask, that I preferred mine with cream and 1 sugar cube. I found myself breathless as he displayed such keen attention to details I'd never expected him to have noticed at all. "I've scheduled a meeting with Hans for tomorrow," he stated, his hand gently offering me my coffee cup. "The meeting will be at my lawyer's office, neutral ground as it were. I will be there but waiting in the reception area unless needed. Thank you, Hannah." Before we discuss work, I wanted to address something important. His stance changed, a less formal approach taking over. I hadn't observed such openness in it before in this office. "I feel it's necessary for you to understand something crucial. Regardless of what transpires between us personally, your position here is completely safe and secure. Your decision to maintain a purely professional relationship is fully acceptable to me. I have no intention of retaliation or making things difficult for you. My word on that. And if I should decide to explore a deeper connection, a spark ignited in his eyes, a glowing intensity that caught me completely off guard. Then we will navigate this together, carefully, slowly learning from any mistakes we inevitably make along the way. You promised transparency concerning your business. I will hold you to that promise. And I expect nothing less." His expression shifted, becoming somber. "Afterward tonight, you are coming to my apartment, and I will tell you everything. I will reveal the complete and full truth of everything, what I'm involved in, what the risks are,
Right.
what it really means to be associated with me. Then you can make an informed decision about whether you still want to be a part of it." The heaviness in his tone sent a tinge of apprehension through me. "That bad? Worse than you probably imagine." He held my gaze steadily. "But you deserve the truth. All of it tonight. All of it tonight." For the rest of the day, we carried on with something approaching a normal routine, although the impending revelations weighed heavily upon me. True to his word, Klaus' demeanor had changed. He still demanded excellence, but his criticism was constructive rather than hurtful. Rather than simply giving orders, he sought my opinion on the decisions that needed to be made. On many occasions during the day, I noticed him observing me with an expression that conveyed an equal measure of concern and a glimmer of hope. That evening, my stomach was in knots as I rode the elevator up to his penthouse. He'd placed an order for dinner at an Italian restaurant, and the food was already set out on his dining table when I arrived. But I found myself with little appetite, far too worried about what he was about to disclose. Finally, he pushed aside his own barely touched plate. "Do you want a version that's been polished, or would you prefer the unvarnished truth?" "The truth. Always the truth." He nodded, his expression serious. "The empire my grandfather created was built on a foundation of providing refuge and protection to Italian immigrants facing exploitation. Over time, this protection racket expanded into other areas. Money lending, gambling, smuggling. When my father took over, the Caruso family controlled significant illegal operations in addition to growing legitimate businesses. Even she. I knew the answer already, but I really had to hear you say it. I am attempting to convert everything into legitimate businesses, but the process is slow, and there are individuals and families who resist this chain. To them, legitimacy signifies weakness, a perception shared by groups such as the Vitellis. Their goal is expansion into territories under my control, and my resistance to their ambitions has sparked tensions, dangerous tensions, potentially deadly tensions, as his jaw tightened. Anna, people in my world don't retire or quit. They die or are violently displaced. Anybody associated with me, family, partners, anyone I hold dear automatically becomes a target for their actions. He looked at me intently. For this reason, I made an effort to keep them at a distance. That's why I was so tough. If the rumor goes around that I'm important to them, I become a bargaining chip. I completed the picture, which has been gradually crystallizing in my head. Hans found out. That's why he approached me. Partially. His objective was twofold: to acquire information and to distract me, all while making questionable alliances. But yes, he understood that being close to them gave him leverage over me. I stood up, had to move. So what you're offering, to explore something personal, you're basically painting a target on my back. Yes. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. Should we choose this path, if we truly acknowledge the relationship between us, then you will be the most valuable pawn on the board. Everybody will understand that this is the quickest path to hurting my feelings. To hurt you. So why are you even offering it? Why not keep pushing me away, if that's safer? He too stood up and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Because to be honest, I'm selfish. I'm tired of this act of pretending I don't care. The thought of them leaving, of us never knowing, the potential of what could have been between us is far more distressing than the fear of something happening to them. It's irrational, I know, completely insane. Welcome to my world. He turned back to me, his expression. But Hannah, I need you to understand. If you choose to join me, I will protect you with every resource, every weapon. In my power, your safety will be paramount. You will not be vulnerable, you will be defended. Think of it like a prisoner with the most expensive guards, or a queen at the head of a powerful army. His gaze intensified, locking onto mine. There's a significant distinction. I moved to stand beside him, watching the city spread out before us, a vast and compelling vista. Among the vibrant lights of this bustling scene resided the Vitellis and their allies, individuals who perceived me solely as a disposable tool or a dangerous threat that absolutely needed eliminating. Could I truly embrace this world with a sense of free will, knowing their perspective? Meeting Hans tomorrow, I finally said. What if he reveals something that changes my perspective? Then we'll deal with it together. Klaus had found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine. But Hans is many things, but he's not stupid. Everything he says will be carefully calculated to best serve his intended purposes. Don't let him manipulate you again. I pressed his hand, but I must understand why he did it, what he hoped to gain from that particular action. I need this closure. Then they'll have it. He turned fully to me. His free hand came up to caress my cheek. Regardless of what you might need, regardless of what you require to feel secure and make a decision, they will ensure that you have it. I promise. The sincerity in his voice dissolved me. I let myself fall into his doorway, letting the warmth of his hand against my skin, his solid presence beside me. It was a truly crazy, dangerous decision. I'm almost certain it was the worst decision I've ever made. But also felt entirely right, in a way that absolutely nothing else had achieved in years. I am scared to death, I admitted quietly. Me too. His thumb brushed my cheekbone. But Hannah, I believe that they might just be worth the fear they instill. He kissed me then, soft and questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I melted into him, into the kiss, into the possibility of something that would probably burn us both, but was done us both, but was too necessary to resist. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathing heavily. Are we really doing this? I asked. Once you've spoken, with Hans not word with Hans da blah, and once you've had ample time to fully absorb everything I've shared with you, if your desire for this remains, if your desire for me remains, then yes, we certainly will do it. I nodded. My heart was racing with both fear and anticipation. I walked into a very dangerous situation, knowingly choosing complications instead of safety, staking everything on a man who acknowledged that he would probably hurt me unintentionally. When I gazed into Klaus' stormy gray eyes and witnessed the vulnerability he so openly shared with me, it became impossible for me to leave. Not yet, maybe not ever. In that case, we'll do it, I whispered. Let's find out what we could be together. His smile was utterly devastating. It transformed his hardened, controlled expression into something almost boyishly charming. Come here, he murmured, pulling me close. Throughout the remainder of the night, we remained deeply entwined, our conversation encompassing everything and nothing, a fragile and precious bond forming against the backdrop of impending danger. Tomorrow I would confront Hans, seeking answers and ultimately the closure I craved. But for tonight, I chose to believe in the possibility, however slim, that two broken individuals could find a way to complement each other, emerging stronger together even in the face of a world determined to separate us. Hans appeared different from how I remembered him, less polished, more guarded and defensive in his demeanor. He sat opposite me in the neutral conference room of Klaus's law firm, his expression carefully controlled, though his eyes betrayed a palpable fear. Klaus, true to his word, remained in the waiting area, available at my request. Hannah Hahn's voice was hesitant, almost reluctant. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, she prefaced her statement with a carefully measured thank you, acknowledging the inconvenience of our meeting. I'm not here seeking reconciliation. I'm here for answers. I maintain my cool, professional tone, a necessary stance given the circumstances. Why did you do it? I asked directly, my gaze unwavering. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. It's complicated, he mumbled, offering a vague and unsatisfying response. Then, simplify it. They manipulated my feelings, exploiting my loneliness and frustration to reach their goal, getting to Klaus. I want to know why. He let out a sigh, running a hand through his dark hair, because I thought he was stopping, then starting all over again. Klaus and I started this business together. Equal partners, building something from nothing. However, over time, he steadily pushed me into a role of diminished importance. More advisory, less decision-making. A hint of bitterness crept into Hans's voice. The Elblick project was supposed to be my chance to prove that I could handle major developments independently. Moreover, the connections to the Vitelli family were strategic partnerships that Klaus should have agreed to, but ultimately refused. His overcautious nature stems from a deep-seated concern for preserving his precious moral high ground as he works toward achieving legitimacy. In order to progress, I made the necessary deals by working with individuals whom Klaus actively sought to avoid, leveraging a pragmatic approach to the situation. Hans leaned forward. Anna, the truth is, in this world, you either grow or you die, period. Klaus's efforts to establish his legitimacy are admirable, yet they are too slow. We were losing ground to more aggressive families. As a result, they chose to compel him by constructing situations which he was required to respond to. Understanding dawned on me. The Vitelli connections weren't just about the Elblick project. The objective was to engineer conflicts which would subsequently incite Klaus to take retaliatory action. It's back to those violent reactions, the very reactions he's attempting to avoid. Hans' silence confirmed it. And I was what? Utilizing collateral damage proved to be a convenient and effective way to distract him while they executed their actual strategy. At first, he met my gaze. But Hannah, it wasn't all manipulation. You are remarkable, intelligent, capable, deserving of better than Klaus's emotional constipation. Some of what I told you was sincere. Which parts? I appreciated the sections in which you made me feel valued and appreciated, or the sections where you inquired about Klaus's schedule and planned activities. Both could be true. He spread his hands. I will not insult them by pretending to be a victim here. I used them. I recognized their vulnerability and exploited it. But I also sincerely enjoyed their company and respected their abilities. How magnanimous. I stood up. This conversation was over. Here is what I learned from you, Hans. I learned that kindness can be a weapon, that attention and validation can be manipulated to serve someone else's agenda, that I was naive to trust someone just because he treated me better than my boss. And Klaus, Hans also stood up. Did he tell them the whole truth about who he is, about the things he has done, Ayan? Or is he just offering them another kind of manipulation? One that is packaged as protection and care. The difference is, Klaus admits that he is broken and dangerous. He does not pretend to be my savior. He asks if I want to navigate his chaos with him, despite all his ugliness. They pretended to care while they used me. Used. And they think that's better? Hans's voice rose slightly. Hannah, he's going to hurt her. Maybe not intentionally, but it's inevitable. With men like Klaus, it seems we're incapable of loving without inevitably causing destruction. Maybe. I stretched out a hand to my purse, but at the very least, I know precisely what I'm agreeing to. At least I'm making this choice with full awareness, not because someone manipulated me into it. I pivoted toward the door, but Hans's voice made me pause. The Vitelis are planning something. A move against Klaus within the next month. They suspect that his attention is currently divided between the restructuring of the business and the developments concerning them. They see vulnerability. I turned slowly. Why are you telling me this? The thought of him getting hurt is unbearable. It's something I'm determined to avoid. Furthermore, regardless of their decision, they'll inevitably be in the crossfire. The Vitelis have witnessed them with us. Thus, they are now aware of their identity. Ice spread through my veins. I thus have the options to accept Klaus's protection, or to risk becoming a target regardless of future events. Welcome to our world, Hannah. Sometimes there are no good options, only survival. I left without answering and stepped into the waiting room, where Klaus stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense. He turned when he heard the door. His stormy gray eyes searched my face. Did you get what you needed? Yes, but Hans mentioned that the Vitelis are planning a significant move. He subtly hinted that I was already a target, irrespective of my decision. Klaus's expression darkened. He's not wrong. That's why I've already increased security around them. Unbeknownst to you, 2 of my men have been stationed outside their apartment building since Friday, carefully watching and ensuring that no one approaches. They're already protecting me. This realization shouldn't have come as a surprise to me, especially since they didn't ask for my consent beforehand. Would you have preferred me to leave you defenseless while you made up your mind? He stepped closer. Hannah, at the instant. Hans addressed her. She became interwoven with my world, regardless of whether we were even conscious of it. I would always make sure that you safe. I should have been angry at the presumption, the lack of choice. On the contrary, I experienced something different. A reluctant acceptance and nearly tooth-gritting submission to the facts presented by Hans. There were no good options, only survival. Between Hans's deliberate manipulation and Klaus's overwhelming protectiveness, I could at least rely on knowing where I stood with Klaus. I have made my decision, I quietly stated. Every muscle in his body contracted. And I'm in. Whatever this is, whatever we're constructing here, I want to give it a shot. But Klaus, I came closer, my hand gently resting on his heart. I need you to promise me something. If this becomes overwhelming, if I find I can't cope with your world, you will let me go. You won't hold me captive with feelings of obligation, protection, or guilt. You will allow me to leave. He covered my hand with his touch tightening against his chest. I could feel his heart beating, strong and regular. I promise, but Hannah, you possess a strength you yourself underestimate. You have successfully navigated the complexities of my world for 18 months now. You just haven't recognized your own capabilities. This interaction was different. It felt more professional, almost detached. Was that the case? His free hand caressed my cheek with a gentle, almost tentative motion. You have witnessed me at my most vulnerable and fragile state. You have successfully weathered crises that would have broken countless others. You have demonstrated remarkable grace and intelligence in maneuvering the intricate politics within my organization. The only significant change is our mutual acknowledgement of the profound significance we hold in each other's lives. Then he kissed me, and the kiss felt different from the one in his apartment. It possessed a depth and intensity that was entirely new. Less hesitant, more secure. A claim and a promises rolled into one. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing heavily. So what now? I asked. Now we're going to figure it out together. We're going to take care of the Vitelis. We're going to navigate office politics. We're trying to build something real, despite all the complications. He put his forehead against mine. And we're doing it without lies or manipulation. Absolute honesty. Remember? Absolute honesty. I took a deep breath. In all honesty, I am terrified of their world. Terrified of what people will say and terrified of the imminent danger. But my greatest fear is walking away and spending the rest of my life tormented by the question of what we might have become. That's enough. His arms wrapped around me, tight and secure. That's more than enough. Entwined in the lawyer's conference room, we stood for several minutes, carefully laying the groundwork, a foundation built upon the principles of truth, fear, and unwavering determination. It wasn't perfect. I probably wasn't even smart, but it was ours. Events of the following weeks unfolded in ways that were both unexpected and surprising. At work, Klaus and I maintained professional boundaries with. The atmosphere held a subtle undercurrent of intimacy, a feeling everyone sensed but avoided openly acknowledging. I observed the curious gazes, listened to the hushed discussions which always ceased when I came into a room. Should you talk? Your opinions couldn't affect what we were building. The security, Klaus had mentioned, became omnipresent, but unobtrusive. I got to know the men who were observing from strategic points. I memorized their schedules and faces. It should have been suffocating. It felt more like the first breath I had taken after holding it for months rather than anything else. Klaus kept his promise of honesty. On, he shared everything with me concerning his father's violent legacy, the intricate dealings he was endeavoring to unravel, and the families that deemed his move toward legitimacy as nothing short of a betrayal. He carefully introduced me to key decision-makers within his organization, not as his secretary, but as his business partner. He clearly and unequivocally established that I was fully under his protection in all crucial aspects. Lena stopped by to see me 2 weeks after my meeting with Hans. Their eyes widened as she observed the security personnel from Klaus' building and the men who had escorted me to fetch her. "This is crazy," she whispered as we rode the elevator up to my apartment. "Like something out of a movie. Crazy. I know, but you look so happy." She then carefully studied the expressions on my face. Really? I considered the question. Was I happy? My life had become infinitely more complicated. I couldn't go anywhere without security. I had to exercise caution regarding what I said and who I was speaking to. Simple things like shopping or meeting friends required planning and coordination. But I was also more myself than I had been in years. Klaus didn't just accept my sharp edges. He valued them. Regarding business decisions, he regularly sought my opinion, always valuing my insights and treating me as an equal partner irrespective of the difference in our hierarchical positions. His gaze, which treated me as if I were both invaluable and influential, had the effect of making me feel completely understood in a way that was utterly unlike anything I'd ever encountered. "Yes," I finally replied. "It's complicated and scary and probably not sustainable in the long run. But right now, in this moment, I'm happy." Lena hugged me tightly. "Then I'll be happy for you. Just promise me that you'll be careful and that when it's no longer worth it, you'll get out." I promise. The threat Hans had warned about manifested itself 3 weeks later. An attempted break-in at my apartment building, stopped by Klaus's security guards before the intruders could get past the lobby. 2 men with Vitelli connections who clearly intended to kidnap me as leverage against Klaus. I found out about it after the fact, when Klaus showed "I'll change them," he said bluntly. "This building isn't secure enough. I have a property, a penthouse, in a building with better security. They'll have their own space, their own life, but they'll be safe." I ought to have protested that he was making decisions without bothering to consult me. However, when I noticed the fear, subtly masked by anger in his expression, I realized this wasn't really a matter of control. This was about a man who was scared to death of losing something precious. "Okay," I said simply. "But I'll hold on to my apartment as a safety net just in case I need extra space or if disagreements arise or if I need some time to be alone. Non-negotiable. Done." He pulled me into his arms, holding me with a desperation that spoke to how close it had been. "Hannah, if anything had happened to you, it wouldn't have. Your people stopped it. Their protection worked this time. But the Vitellis won't stop. They'll keep looking for weaknesses. And them?" His arms tensed. "You're my biggest weakness. You know that. Hans fucking made sure of that." I moved far enough back so that I could see his face clearly. "Then we'll deal with this together, whatever that means." Basically, it signifies open warfare, a full-blown conflict between families. The potential for extreme bloodshed is incredibly high and immediate. Then his jaw would tighten, or I will give you exactly what you really want. Negotiating territorial concessions, forming business partnerships, and then falling back into the violent reactions I'd been so desperately trying to avoid. No, I cupped his face in my hands. They're not sacrificing what they're building. All this, a legitimate empire, a cleaner future, solely to protect me. We'll find another way. Hannah, I'm serious. Klaus, I'm serious. I didn't agree to be the reason they fall back into the life they want to leave. And, we'll figure this out together, but we'll figure it out without compromising their goals. Something shifted in his expression. Awe mixed with love, mixed with fear. How are you real? He whispered. How do you exist in my world? Just as you exist in mine. Imperfectly chaotic, but determined. He kissed me, pouring everything he couldn't express in words into the intense touch. When we pulled apart, his eyes had cleared. Determination replaced fear. Okay, we're doing this together. But Hannah, this means you follow my safety protocols. No argument, no resistance. Your safety is non-negotiable. Agreed. If you are mindful of the fact that I am your partner and not your prisoner, then you must understand that I am entitled to a say in decisions impacting my life. Always. He pressed his forehead to mine. You always have a say. That's the difference between me and Hans. I wish her strength and self-determination, even if that idea frightens me. He wanted her dependent and grateful. I know. That's why I'm here with you, instead of running as far away from you both as possible. We spent the rest of the night making plans for the move, for increased security, for dealing with the Vitellis. By dawn, I was exhausted, but strangely energized. This was my life now. The path lay fraught with danger and political intricacies, yet he found strength in the company of a man who consistently sought to improve while acknowledging his almost certain, at times spectacular failures. The reality was far removed from the life I had envisioned when I took on the role of his secretary 18 months before that. It was infinitely more complicated, more dangerous, more time-consuming. Yet, when the morning sun bathed Klaus in its golden light as it streamed through my apartment's windows, witnessing the vulnerability he only revealed to me, I couldn't help feel a strong sense of satisfaction with the path that brought us here. I love you, I said suddenly. The words surprised us both. I can't pinpoint precisely when it transpired. Perhaps it simmered and grew for several months. It's also possible it was instantaneous, and I was simply unwilling to acknowledge it. But I love you, Klaus. Your imperfect qualities, your impossibly high standards, and the constant striving for self-improvement despite your profound fear of failure, it all captivates me. His eyes widened considerably. The storm-gray irises shifted to an almost silvery hue. Hannah, you don't have to reciprocate. I understand that this is happening very fast, and you are likely not completely ready. And I love you too, Hannah. He gently took my face in both hands, his touch simultaneously overwhelming and unsettling, irrevocably profound. You are the best and the worst thing that has ever happened in my life. You are everything, and I can't envision my life without you. The confession left me feeling completely and utterly undone. I responded by kissing him, attempting to pour 18 months of intricate tangled emotions into that single. He returned it, lifting me gently and carrying me to my bedroom. We need to sleep, I whispered against his lips, even as my fingers found the buttons of his shirt. It's almost dawn. Sleep is overrated. His mouth found the tender spot below my ear. I prefer to use my time to demonstrate to them precisely what your significance to me truly entails. I couldn't argue with that logic. Later, intertwined beneath the sheets, bathed in the sunlight pouring through the windows, I felt something sink into my chest, a quiet, settling peace, maybe, or acceptance, or even just the comprehension that this course of action was right. Messy and complicated and potentially dangerous, but right. What are you thinking about? His voice, rough from the weight of exhaustion, suggested I'd made either the best decision I'd ever made or the worst. Which one do you think it is? I pivoted to him, tracing the scar upon his ribs with my finger, following my final, courageous question that sought to understand its history. In his youth, he participated in knife fights, defending the territory his father had claimed. The enduring reminder of the violence that had been a part of his past, even as he attempted to construct a more promising future. I think it's both, I said honestly, because you make me feel seen and valued and challenged in a way that no one else ever has. The worst, because their world is dangerous and unpredictable, and I can't completely protect myself, no matter how careful I am. But they stay anyway. I stay anyway. I kiss the scar gently, because the alternative is walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have built. That's worse than any danger their world holds. His arms tightened around me. I won't let anything happen to them. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do will be safe. I know. But Klaus, they have to let me share some of the risk. I'm not a delicate flower that needs to be protected in a glass case. I'm their partner. That means facing danger together. I'm not sure I can do that. Watch as you get into situations where that could hurt you. Then we'll work on it together, just like we work on everything else. He was silent for a long time. You're hilariously reasonable sometimes. Someone has to be. You're dramatic enough for both of us. He laughed. The sound rumbled through his chest under my ear. Fair point. At last we dozed off, deeply entwined, while the city all around us slowly awakened and began its day. When, at long last, we stood up to face the day, to take on the challenges of the Vitellis, the office politics, and all the intricate complications inherent in our impossible situation, a sense of readiness enveloped me. Not because I was devoid of fear, but because I found myself interacting with someone who treated me as a genuine equal partner despite the numerous reasons that suggested our relationship wouldn't work. The road ahead would be difficult. Mistakes would occur, there would be disagreements, and moments when the danger seemed to be completely overwhelming. Watching Klaus get dressed, I noticed his furtive glances, as if he had trouble believing my presence. The look on his face revealed his belief so profound that I instantly knew it'd succeed. The process of discovery would involve grappling with one chaotic, intricate, and beautiful step after another. A journey driven by the belief that some things are truly worth fighting for, even when the odds seem utterly insurmountable. And what we were building together, honest, intense, slightly crazy, was worth every risk, every complication, every moment of fear. I fled from a hazardous situation straight into another one, but this time I made a conscious decision, knowing fully what I was getting into, and I had someone by my side, a partner who would go to any length, even through fire, to protect me. And somehow that made